For those of you who don't know me, and there's a lot of people who have signed up for this webinar, the seminar today, who are not my patients, and I'm really super excited about that because so many times we've done these in the past and it's just been my patients, or I get the word out to my patients, and this is a totally new format for us. I'm super excited about it because I think we're really developing some scale here on how we can get information to people. So welcome everyone. Our goal at North Woodward is really to provide everybody with the absolute best care possible. And one of the ways that we do that is to equip you with the knowledge and the tools that you really need to manage your own health. When we can provide medications, we can bring you in the office and weigh you and check some labs, but what we can do pales in comparison to what you can do for your own health, and that's what we really want to drive home. And it's hard to get through to that, to get that message through to you in just a short period of time. So we want to get back to doing regular evening meetings on various healthcare topics. That's been a real passion of mine, and we did this a lot before COVID. We kind of got stymied in the middle of COVID. Now we're kind of emerging from COVID, but I think we did learn that a tool like Zoom or Microsoft Groups and that type of thing, Microsoft Teams, can really provide us with some scalability. People can do this at home. They don't have to come into the office. We don't have to have a physical location. So in 25 years of practice, we put together a really great team. We have a great team of providers, my partners, we've been together, all of us, for at least 17 years. You might know that Dr. Lambrecht's going to be retiring in the next couple of weeks. But we stand by, ready here to provide you guys with care. We have great PAs, we have great staff, and we have also something that's really unique to not all practices, but it is great with our practices. We have care managers, nursing care managers, who help us, come alongside us to help you treat yourself and provide you with the care, the follow-up, the coaching, and that type of thing that you need to take really good control of your health. So, like I said, we've really put an emphasis in the past on patient education, and we're looking forward to really expanding our reach through this kind of a format. So tonight will be our first ever try at a virtual format. I'm excited. Like I said, please be patient with us. We're working out things like volume and slides and that kind of thing. We did a dry run last night. It's new technology for me, and not for everybody. I mean, I've been on Zoom calls, but I've never really produced one. We're going to go ahead and get going here. I'm trying to advance the slides here. And sorry. There we go. So tonight's topic is really geared for type 2 diabetics. Not that this topic wouldn't be beneficial to a lot of people, because it does have some bearing with weight reduction and that type of thing. But our real goal tonight is to reach people, individuals with type 2 diabetes, and that's who this is really geared for. This whole initiative of trying to get this education out to people has really been spurred on by something that Blue Cross Blue Shield has done, and our practice was selected to participate. And Blue Cross Blue Shield has kind of put some money behind this, not to reimburse us for this type of a thing, but they've wanted us to teach a low-carb diet. They put money behind the use of continuous glucose monitors for type 2 diabetics, which is a completely new thing. That's super exciting, and we're trying to roll these out to all of our type 2 diabetics, especially ones that have Blue Cross Blue Shield, because Blue Cross is reimbursing a good portion of those. In the past, to get a continuous glucose monitor, and for those of you who don't know what they are, they're the thing that you see on TV, Freestyle Libre, the Dexcom 6 glucose monitors that go on the back of your arm. They feed information into your cell phone or a little reader, and it tells you what your sugar is 24/7. It's a great feedback tool for patients, if they have a piece of pizza, they can see how high their sugars go up, and you don't have to poke your fingers all the time. So that's something that we're really trying to roll out. Again, that's been pushed by Blue Cross Blue Shield. So not all insurances are covering that if you have type 2 diabetes. But for those of you with any blue product, we are going to be trying to get you into a glucose monitor, continuous glucose monitor this year. And our care managers, Lindsay and Molly, have been really helpful with that. And then they've also expanded coverage for some of the new medications. The newer technology is really great. There's 2 groups of medications. You hear these on TV, and when you usually hear a commercial on TV, it usually means that your insurance isn't going to cover it. Farxiga, Jardiance, Invokana, and then Ozempic and Trulicity. Blue Cross Blue Shield has made these available to type 2 diabetics without going through prior authorization. So we're really excited to be able to run these out for a lot of our patients. And it is, like I said, much better technology. So those are the 3 kind of prongs of this initiative that Blue Cross is running out. And today we're really focusing on the low carb diet. And just wanted to disclose, we have no financial interest in here. We're not getting paid for writing more Ozempic or Trulicity. This is something that we're all doing after hours and just to get our patients better educated. A couple really brief thank yous, and then we'll get going. Like I said, care managers Lindsay and Molly are super helpful here in the office, educating patients, teaching them diet, acting as a coach in some situations, whatever it takes to get people's blood sugars under control. And today we have the privilege of having Carmen Epstein. She's a dietitian at an organization we're affiliated with. They do a lot of our contracting, United Physicians, and also Bailey Rice, who's another dietitian that's just joined her in the last week. And I know Bailey's on the call too. So thank you, ladies. Thank you guys for tuning in and trying this. We hope to make the quality really good so that you'll want to come back and do these again. And that's really what we want to do. And then also make it something valuable for your health. And then lastly, I just wanted to say a little quick thank you to Team Rehab. Ryan's providing us with technical support and also the use of their Zoom account, because when we go to a Zoom account needing this many people to be tuned in, you can't do it for free. So Team Rehab has a robust account that they've shared with us tonight for no cost. And Team Rehab's been a real great ally with our practice. The cool thing about Team Rehab, and I've developed a relationship with them, is that all of their clinics are privately owned by the people that work there. And I think that really makes, it makes them really take a lot of pride in giving their patients, their rehab for various injuries and whatnot. They really put in the extra effort because they're owners. As we're going through the presentation today, if you have questions, type them in the chat box. Lindsay and Molly are going to kind of monitor those and kind of coalesce some of the questions into a short question and answer time at the end for Carmen. And to start this off, I wanted to kind of kick it off with a patient experience video. This gentleman's name is Frankie, and his story was shared with us when we kicked this all off. He was a patient at U of M, and I presume he's still a patient at U of M. And he's got a story that's not unlike a lot of people, and he's going to talk about how he really incorporated a low carbohydrate diet and the effect that it's had on him, his blood sugars, and his life overall. To do this, you're going to go, we tried to put this embedded in the discussion yesterday, but the quality of the video was not quite as good. So you're going to click on the link in the chat box, okay? And there's going to be a link there that Ryan's put up, and it's going to say a YouTube video. And you're going to just click on that, and you're going to watch that. and it's going to take about 4 minutes and 30 seconds. So I'm going to go ahead and put the clock on, and then we'll reconvene right back here with Carmen presenting. Okay, so go ahead and do that, and we'll go from there.
But that's fine. That's fine. I know what you look like. I'll just imagine I see you there. But I'd be glad to answer any questions that you might have. I'll go on forever. I'm almost 70. I'm 69 in January. Okay. I was at a state in my life. I was taking 170 units of insulin a day plus a full dose of Victoza. My A1C was 11.5. I did very little. I was inactive. I was miserable. I couldn't hardly get out of a chair. They were doing everything they could. I thought I was trying. I spent most of my day trying to manage my diabetes. I was taking 6 injections a day, constantly trying not to eat, but always eating. It seemed like, and fighting my portions and all this stuff. It was constant. I was very serious-minded about, number one, wanting help, and number two, making this work and making a lifestyle change. I've been dieting and trying to lose weight and whatever all my life, especially since I had diabetes. But I was really ready to help myself. Last time I took this MOVE program to the VA, they were pushing more carbohydrates in the diet. It was a different thing, but then I got in with Dr. Drozda's program. That was just starting out. I had to wait for that, and it saved my life. I'm Sicilian. I've cooked all my life. I was always the pastas, pizzas, all the carbohydrate cook, but I was able to translate that into, cooking meats and vegetables, and the food costs are a little higher, but it never did concern me. It's like buying medicine or whatever. 2-week period of time where I didn't feel good. My body had to adjust to no carbohydrates. But then when I got through that, I felt great. I felt a lot of energy. The CGM is a key part, because that's like watching a motion picture 24 hours a day. You know everything you're putting in your mouth and how it reacts to your body. If you got somebody monitoring it, like a healthcare professional, they can save your life and call you in the morning and tell you, take a little less insulin. So that's what was going on with me. I just started melting, and I started going low in my blood sugar because I didn't need that insulin. And it wasn't too long, I was off of insulin. I could tell you right now, in my particular case, carbohydrates and insulin was killing me. If I could have started and had this information when I was a young man, my whole life would have been different. I'm a different person than I've ever been in my whole life. In a relatively short time, it's been 5 months I've been low carb eating. But my whole body is made up of a different substances. I'm not macaroni and ice cream. I'm meat and good vegetables. You know what I mean? You understand what I'm saying?
Okay, we'll try to put that video up. I guess I'm kind of quiet here, so I'm going to try to speak up. We'll try to put that video up on our website if you want to take a listen to that again. I think it's pretty compelling. This guy is super honest and just really has a passion for the changes that he's made. And it's really all stuff that he did without doctors. And I thought it was really a good video. So that's kind of our introduction to Carmen. Carmen, are you there? You can go ahead and take over the screen. I'm going to mute myself, and we're going to listen to Carmen, the dietitian. Carmen Epstein, she's going to give a little presentation about what exactly is a low-carb diet and how you can do it. Then we'll take some questions and then wrap up.
Okay, I just wanted to, was Ryan going to share my screen, or am I sharing my screen?
Yeah,
Sure.
that's you if you can. Yeah, I don't
Oh
know.
yeah,
How to,
I can. I just said you were going to share my slides and the outline I got yesterday, so I just want to be sure I can do that. Let's make sure I get the right one. Okay. So hopefully that works. Okay, can you see my screen?
it looks great.
Okay, let me just get it in presentation mode. Okay. Okay, should be good to go. All right. Well, okay, so I'm Carmen Epstein. I'm a registered dietitian and certified diabetes care and education specialist. I know that's a mouthful. It's formerly known as certified diabetes educator. So we just had a change in our title. And today we're going to be talking about some basic diabetes meal planning. So we'll be focusing on carbohydrate identification, label reading, plate method for carbohydrate, for portioning carbohydrates, and carbohydrate counting. We'll also define what it means to have a low carb diet. You know, that term is used a lot, but I think sometimes there's some confusion about what it actually means. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. So the meal planning goals for diabetes, there's many different factors. We're not just looking at the carbohydrates, we're also looking at some other aspects. So to manage diabetes well, we need to consider how the A1C is doing, how the blood sugar is doing, the blood pressure, the cholesterol. We refer to this as the ABCs of diabetes. So A1C, blood pressure, and cholesterol. So these can all affect diabetes complications. If one of those is out of control, we need to get it in control to reduce the risk of diabetes, or I'm sorry, the reduce of complications. So achieving and maintaining a healthy weight is another one of the goals. Minimum weight loss goal of 5% is recommended for individuals who are overweight. So weight loss can lower blood sugar just from the weight loss alone, not just the carb reduction, but weight loss. And then therefore reduce the need for diabetes medications. Weight loss can also help lower blood cholesterol and blood pressure. So again, weight loss is key. For someone who weighs 200 pounds, that would be a 10-pound weight loss. So a small amount of weight loss can be effective for improving blood sugar. It doesn't have to be, you know, getting to your high school weight or your personal goal weight. As long as your weight's coming down, we're going to see some improvement in those numbers. And then lastly, overall good nutrition. We need to ensure adequate intake of essential nutrients, manage any other health needs. You know, if somebody has other health problems besides diabetes, those need to be considered as well as the preferences of the individual, and maintain the enjoyment of eating so that you'll want to keep doing it. Kind of like Frankie said, he was, you know, enjoying the foods he was eating. So that was key to keeping it going. So, okay, meal planning for diabetes also shares similarities with general healthy eating recommendations for everyone. Most adults could benefit from reducing excessive carb intake, particularly sugars and, you know, starchy foods, refined carbohydrates. So there's a benefit to doing that for everyone in the family. I just stress that because sometimes people feel like they're on a special diet and they have to, you know, eat different foods than the rest of the family. But if you can get your family to kind of meet you halfway, it can work out better for getting that support and for maintaining diet changes. Okay, so this was just to give you an overview of all the things that a dietitian is considering when they're working with a patient. So we don't want things to be too rigid or too unrealistic for any individual. Okay, so we have talked about my plate or general healthy eating. This is the guidance for everyone from children to adults, instead of our food pyramid. And those of you that remember the food pyramid from years ago, we were really focused on grains, right? It was the foundation of the pyramid. So there's less of that emphasis on the grain group. And eating a variety of foods from all food groups will make it more likely that we'll meet our nutritional needs. So that's why we have the food groups, to kind of give us, some guidance as to how we should be selecting foods. And this approach can work for diabetes to an extent, but since 3 of these food groups are carbohydrates, we have a modified versions for diabetes that we'll be reviewing tonight. Okay, so next slide. So many factors affect blood sugar. And so types of food that we eat. So carbohydrates, that's the main driver of blood sugar increase after we eat, is the carbohydrates. Fats and protein are less likely to affect blood sugars. Portions, how much we eat of those foods, is a big part of it as well. Many times when I meet with a patient, after we're kind of going over carbs, they say, "Oh, it's portions, isn't it?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's definitely the portions." So, a lot of times finding that middle ground is just about, reworking the foods that you enjoy into smaller amounts. And then the timing of your meals and snacks. If you're eating too frequently during the day, that can keep your blood sugar elevated the whole day. So making sure that we're timing, your meals and your snacks in a way that keeps your blood sugar steady. And then food combinations. So food combinations are going to have a big effect on how much the blood sugar spikes after we eat. So in this photo, you've got the toast, and then you've got the eggs and meat. So if you only ate the toast, the blood sugar might spike a lot faster and come down a lot faster, potentially go a lot higher than having a balanced meal, a mixed meal of protein, fat, and carbohydrate. So that is another consideration when you're planning meals. Okay. Sorry, I'm doing this too fast. Okay, so what are carbohydrates? Carbohydrates are starches, sugars, and fibers in foods. So a lot of times people are surprised to hear that it's not just the starches, it's also sugars, like fruit and milk has natural sugar as well. So kind of considering all of those sources, which we'll go over in more detail. But carbohydrates, there's not a specific amount that's ideal for everybody. In fact, we need to consider, like we were talking about before, we need to consider a lot of different needs. So we don't want to just dwell on reducing carbs and not consider those other aspects. But we do know from some of the research that A1C is lowered by a low carb diet. Just like Frankie was talking about, he'd been on that diet for 5 months and he was seeing a big improvement. The drawback to the low carb diet, which is something to consider, is that the main benefits are seen in the first 6 months. After 1 year, we do see the blood sugars that continue to be well controlled. But if you're losing weight on any type of diet at about a year out from the initiation of improving the diet, you'll see a similar result. So many different diet patterns can impact the blood sugar in a positive way as long as the person is losing weight. So weight loss is always a consideration in some of the low carb diet studies, that it's not simply just the low carb aspect, it's also the fact the weight is coming down. And then there's the question of maintenance. Some people have tried low carb diets and found it difficult to maintain for long periods of time, longer than 6 months to a year. They may, swing back in the other direction. So my goal as a dietitian is to always make sure my patients have the skills to be able to navigate changes in circumstances, changes in their lifestyle, and be able to increase and decrease carbs in a responsible way so they can, keep their blood sugars well controlled and meet their other needs as well. So low carb diets can be fairly easy to implement when you're really motivated and exciting to see the results, but make sure that you're working with a dietitian and getting support when it gets a little bit more challenging. It's important to consider fiber because patients who don't get enough fiber do have poor health outcomes, and that includes diabetes patients. So we want to make sure you're getting at least 14 grams per 1,000 calories. And so that translates to about 17 to 30 grams per day for most people. And so just depending on your calorie needs. Okay. So let's go over the carbohydrate categories of foods. So there's three main categories of healthy foods that contain carbohydrates. Like we talked about with the My Plate example, that 3 of the 5 food groups basically are carb foods. So starches, this includes grains, whether they're whole grains or refined grains, certain vegetables, potatoes, sweet potatoes, corn, peas, winter squashes like butternut squash, acorn squash, legumes, so beans and lentils, those are starchy as well. And then another big category is fruit, and then milk and yogurt. Notice that we don't have cheese. It's not all dairy foods, but milk and yogurt contain sugar. So we need to consider the carbohydrate content in those. All right, so now that we've kind of squared away what the carb foods are, what are the non-carb foods? Foods that don't have a direct impact on the blood sugar. So this is meat. This includes beef, pork, chicken, fish, any animal meat, cheese, eggs, nuts, fats and oils, so butter, olive oil, olives, salad dressing, as long as it's not sweetened. And then, so I mentioned another mayonnaise, that's another fat that doesn't really have any carbohydrates. Tofu, which is a high protein food, but it doesn't really have any carbs, even though it's made from a bean. And then non-starchy vegetables. We generally don't consider the carb content of the non-starchy vegetables, which is things like broccoli, carrots, asparagus, and any of those green vegetables. And we'll make sure you have lists of these foods. I know we're providing some lists after this, but non-starchy vegetables, kind of like, salads. And this example here with the mushrooms and the Brussels sprouts, this would also be in that category. And I do have an asterisk on the non-starchy vegetables, because if you eat a large portion, there is some carbohydrate in that. And for most patients with type 2 diabetes, they won't need to worry about that. But for some that if they dose their insulin very specifically based on what they're eating, they may need to consider that. So that's more of an individual need versus everyone to consider that. Never want to discourage eating plenty of those vegetables. So don't worry too much about the carbs. Okay, so this is the plate method, which is a totally visual method for planning meals. You don't have to deal with any numbers. You don't have to look at any labels to do this. The only thing you need to know is what the carbohydrate foods are. So in this example, you've got a plate that's got everything in neat little boxes, right? Everything's divided. So half the plate is non-starchy vegetables. A quarter of the plate is some kind of starch, like rice, it could be noodles, potatoes. And then another quarter of the plate is your protein food. So of course, plate size would have a big impact on these portions, right? Because if you're using a very large plate, or if you're going to a restaurant and they're serving the food on a platter, which most restaurants do these days, that will make a huge difference in the portion. So this is a 9-inch plate, and you can think of it as the size of a standard paper plate. You can kind of compare your own plates to that to see if they're on close to that size, or if you need to maybe consider using a different plate. So this is different than the My Plate that we talked about earlier, because it pushed the fruit off the plate and filled in the gap with extra vegetables. So this is, if you were to just eat the foods that are on this plate right here, this would actually qualify as a low carb meal based on the definition we're going to discuss later. So on the side, however, you do see there's a serving of milk and a serving of fruit. So that you can think of those as being optional, depending on your preference or your needs. Some people need more carbohydrates than others, but keep in mind that as you add those extra carb foods, they might drive up your carb content beyond what we consider low carb. And that, that's kind of a personal preference if you want to include those. Another thought is that you could think of having the fruit maybe in the afternoon after having lunch. You could spread it out into some snacks later in the day to keep the blood sugar from spiking too much at that meal. Okay, so now that we've done the plate method, that's a totally numbers-free way to go. We can go on to some numbers. So label reading. So there's two things on the labels that you really want to focus on when you're talking about carbohydrates. They're highlighted here, the serving size of the food and then the total carbohydrate number. And so you're looking for grams. You want to know what the total grams of carbohydrate is. And there is always sugar and fiber listed as well, but you don't need to count that separately. That's already been included in the total carbohydrate number. This example doesn't have any fiber grams, but that would also be the case. So you just have to look at that total carb to get the impact of that food. Okay, so this is a different version of the nutrition facts label. There's been some changes in the past few years, and you'll see some stragglers with the old label, but as more and more I'm seeing this version. So they added some things, took some things away that weren't that useful. But the main thing I wanted to focus on with this is the addition of added sugars. So added sugars in this example is 10 grams, and it's already, like we talked about before, already included in the total carbohydrate. So that 10 grams is already accounted for, but you can see how much of the sugar has been added versus how much is already in the other ingredients in the food. And so this added sugar is usually there just for sweetener. It doesn't come with any additional nutrients. So it's kind of what we call empty calories, or just basically just sugar with no benefits. So you'd want to try to keep that to a minimum. And in this example, this would actually be considered a high added sugar content. And one of the ways you can tell that quickly is by looking at the percentage daily value on the right-hand side. So any nutrient on the label, if it's 20% or more, it's considered high. So this would be a food that's high in added sugars. Does have some fiber, but it's got quite a bit of added sugar. You can see the fiber is only 14% of your daily value. So kind of weighing one's a moderate amount of a good thing and one's a high amount of a not so good thing. So that can be a really great tool to use when you're shopping. I use this a lot when I'm looking at yogurt. Yogurt can have a lot of different amounts of sweetener. It can also be useful for things like granola bars, cereals, anything where there's some starch there, but there's also some sugar, and then added sugar can vary quite a bit. Okay, so carbohydrate counting is another step. Once you have looked at labels and you've got some numbers to work with, you can use a system called carbohydrate counting to really personalize your diet and get a good idea of how much carbohydrate is the right amount for you. So this is based on Dietary Exchanges, if anyone's familiar with that, for meal planning. It's consistent with that. So one serving of carbohydrate is equal to 15 grams of carbohydrate. So if we go back to that label, this example of 37 grams of carbohydrate, that we divide that by 15, we get basically 2.5 servings of carbohydrate in 2/3 of a cup of food. So it's not a very big portion for that much carbohydrate. But so that serving is a very small unit. I always tell people a serving is different than a portion. A serving is a standardized amount, and a portion is a personalized amount. So I don't know if you caught that, but serving, standardized, S, portion, personalized. So that's a nice way to remember it, so that you don't get too bogged down when you see that serving size is so small. It doesn't mean that's all you can have. So you can add and subtract your servings as needed to make a portion for yourself that's personalized. And definitely an input from a dietitian to really look at your personal situation, what your blood sugars are like. that would be really helpful figuring out how many servings is a good goal. So here are some examples of carbohydrate servings. And these are all 15 grams of carbohydrate. They are all ready to eat portions. So everything is cooked, the rice and the pasta are cooked. They're pretty small. I think, a slice of bread, a small apple, half a banana. I have so many patients that come to me saying, well, I like bananas, but I can only have half a banana, so I don't buy them anymore. And I say, well, you can have a whole banana, but it's just 2 carb servings. So you have to consider how that's going to fit into your meal plan. So you can mix and match these, and I kind of use the blocks to use that as an example. Like it's like a building block. Like some people need 2, some people need 3, some people might need 5. And then if you're doing very low carb, you might only do 1 or none at a meal. So general portion recommendations, these are just a guideline. So when many of my patients look at these numbers, some of them feel like, oh, wow, that's a lot of carbs. Some feel like that's nowhere near enough. They have almost a shock when they see this. So everybody's in a different place and has a different experience with carbs and portioning. So this is just a general guidance. And even though there's a minimum amount, it doesn't mean you have to have that amount. But you could think of it as up to 45 grams per meal for women if they're trying to lose weight. But it could be 0, it could be 15, it could be anything that works for you. For weight maintenance, generally this is for people who are at a healthy weight, so a BMI of under 25. And I know that BMI isn't a perfect tool for assessing weight. Some people are at a healthy BMI, but they have a lot of abdominal fat, and that increases their risk of having high blood sugar. So they might still benefit from some weight loss. The opposite can be true. A person's BMI can be over 25, and they might be at a healthy weight for their body type. So we just look at the BMI as a general cutoff. But if you're truly at a healthy weight and your blood sugars are well controlled, you might have a little bit more flexibility with your carbs to keep your blood sugars in check. Okay, so take a second, just look for where you would fall in these numbers, maybe to make a mental note of how many carb servings you would be aiming for per meal. And then we'll go back to the other slide before to see how you could portion some meals. Okay, so everybody should be somewhere between 2 and 5 servings per meal. Okay, so looking at if you would have a slice of bread for 1 serving, you could do 2 slices of bread and a small apple. You could do a full cup of cooked rice and still be at 3 servings. And as long as that was the only carb food. So you can mix and match and add and subtract as needed. And really the key to knowing how this is working is what is your blood sugar doing? So anybody who has a continuous glucose monitor can watch their blood sugar going up and coming back down after they eat. And it's really helpful for really personalizing this plan. Okay, so what about snacks? So another misconception I get from patients is that you have to eat 5 or 6 times a day to keep your blood sugar stable. And I think in the past that was kind of recommended more often, but we don't generally recommend eating snacks unless you're feeling hungry. And then if you do, you want to make sure you're having moderate amounts of carbs or low carbs at snack times. So a snack generally for a goal would be 15 grams of carb or 1 carb serving. These are some examples: a small orange, again, like a tennis ball size, 3 cups of popcorn, a half cup of the unsweetened applesauce. If it's sweetened, it really drives up the carb content. Berries and melon tend to be pretty low in sugar, so the portion is bigger on that. 15 pretzels, and that's probably the least healthy, nutritious source of carbohydrate on this list, because the pretzels aren't usually whole grain and they typically are really high in sodium. So I would say, the other ones are more nutrition and more nutrition focused, and snacks should really be an opportunity to try to add nutrition that you might be lacking at your meals since you're cutting back on the carbs at meals. And so you might be missing some nutrition there that you could make up for with snacks. And then the last two snacks on the list are combination snacks. So you could have one slice of whole grain bread with some turkey, and that would be, a half sandwich would be a 15-gram carb snack, and it would be more substantial, more filling. You could do 5 or 6 whole grain crackers with peanut butter or cheese, or you could do an apple with peanut butter. That's a popular snack a lot of my patients like to have. That's a good combination. Okay, so what is a low carb diet? This is a question I always ask my patients when they come to me saying, I've been eating low carb. I'm like, well, what does that mean to you? How is that defined? So we actually do have a definition of what low carb is. And you can see there's 4 different categories based on, the amount of carbohydrate for the calories. So this is based on a 2000 calorie diet. So some of those gram numbers might vary from person to person. Some people need less than 2,000 calories, so they might need to modify the carb grams. And so a dietitian could definitely help you figure out what is a personalized carb goal to be in that low category or that moderate category. I find most of my patients are successful in either the low or moderate level. It just really depends on where they started. So if somebody comes in to see me and they're eating well over 200 grams of carbohydrate every day, I'm gonna, it's gonna be really difficult for them to go down to the very low carbohydrate level. Their blood sugar would definitely improve. They're probably gonna see a lot of improvement if they knock it down to the moderate level or the low level. They don't necessarily have to jump that far. So I often look at this as a shift you could think of it as a shift from one category to another, or you could even think of it as shifting from one end of the category to the other end. For example, if someone's eating 100 or 210 grams per day, so at the higher end of the moderate level, but then they come back and see me a few weeks later and they're eating 150 grams. So they've cut a good 60 grams out for the day. That's a pretty good reduction. And so they're still in that moderate category, but their blood sugars are coming down and they're losing weight because they've cut their total food intake down. So that is still giving them the results. So don't worry too much about the labels. Focus on what's actually happening with your blood sugar and with your weight. And that'll give you some guidance as to what you need to do next, if you can stay with what you're doing or if you need to make additional changes. Another thought is if you're doing a very low carbohydrate diet, chances are something's filling that void, right? You're going to be eating more protein and more fat. So if that's the case, the quality of the foods that you're selecting is important. So if somebody's starting to eat a lot more fat in their diet, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But if they're eating things like bacon and butter and a lot of cheese and a lot of, I've had many patients that are eating pork rinds because there's no carbs, and it's like a substitute for the chips they were eating. So a diet like that versus a diet where they're eating higher fat foods like avocado, nuts, using olive oil for cooking, and then maybe they're eating salmon more often. Those are the types of changes that are really going to benefit their health overall. Thinking about how we want to manage the cholesterol and manage the blood pressure and overall health. So the quality of those carbs is really important as well. The quality of the fats is really important. And then also for the very low carbohydrate level, that is not recommended to just implement on your own. There are some people that would be at risk if they did a very low carbohydrate diet. It really depends on the medication the patient is on. And there's some other health conditions and other behavioral aspects that dietitians will screen for to make sure that that's appropriate. So that's something to consider. I recommend consulting with a dietitian and your doctor before implementing a very low carbohydrate diet. Okay, so I think I covered most of my main points, and next is a summary. So to summarize, there's 2 methods you can use to plan meals as you're reducing carbohydrates in the diet. You can use plate method and or carb counting. I would recommend kind of getting familiar with both methods because carb counting can really give you a skill that you can, you won't need labels. You'll just be able to kind of recall from memory and assess foods that are, prepared like lasagna or soup or, things that don't have a label. And so the more that you practice carb counting, the more that you can get really familiar with the foods and be able to eyeball any plate of food and know your carb counts. Label reading, focusing on serving size and total carbohydrate, and then considering things like fiber content and added sugars to assess the quality of the carbohydrate food. And then using your glucose checks and weight to guide, what direction you need to go next. Are you on track? If you're losing weight, chances are your blood sugar is going to be coming down and you don't necessarily have to take any additional steps. We can take those steps if we need to in the future. And then checking glucose, of course, like I said, CGMs, hopefully more patients will be able to get those so they don't have to poke their fingers as often to be able to check after meals and really understand how their body is responding to those meals and carbohydrates. And then lastly, so important to meet with a registered dietitian. We are not the food police. We're there to be your support, and we want to know what your goals are, and we want to be able to help you meet your personal health goals. So we always meet you where you are. We don't tell you what to do, and we will provide that support ongoing. And that's a benefit you have with North Woodward is that we can provide that, and there's really no limits to the visits. So, and then there's other benefits you have through your insurance as well, where you can meet with a dietitian every year. There's some limits if you go to outside facility, but it's something that all patients with diabetes can access every year. Okay, so any questions?
Thank you, Carmen. Molly, Lindsay, have you guys had a chance to kind of look over some of the chat?
Yes. Hang on. Is that better? No. Steve, or Ryan, can you guys read in the chat box? Because there are some questions.
I can read it. The question that someone posed was, what types of food include B12 and how much would you recommend?
So that, that depends on someone's age, but I think B12 is, that's something that's in animal foods. So I guess it doesn't really apply to our topic, but animal foods contain B12, meats, dairy foods, eggs. There are some vegan foods that have added B12, like soy milk and nutritional yeast and things like that. So it can definitely be something you can get if you aren't eating animal foods. Oh, I see a question here about net carbs. Yeah, net carbs, I do recommend ignoring them because it's mainly a marketing method that people are using on packages. And it's not something that is evidence-based. The science is really fuzzy around that. Everyone has different responses to fiber. So when net carbs, for those of you that don't know, are when they subtract the fiber grams from the total carbohydrate. And so a lot of companies are using this on foods that have a lot of added fiber. They will use like massive amounts of bulking fiber ingredients to make a wrap or make some kind of, brownie even. Like Fiber One products have these bulking fibers. And so they can say, oh, it's got 10 grams of fiber and 20 grams of carbs. So therefore it's 10 net grams of carbohydrate. Well, blood sugar doesn't always respond the way we expect to those net carb estimates. So I advise people to just look at the total carbs. And if you notice that you're really not having as much of a glucose spike with some of those foods, then you can, you can personalize that. You can, especially people who dose insulin based on their blood sugar or their carb content they're going to be eating, they might have to personalize that, but there's not really a guidance that I recommend. The American Diabetes Association does not recognize net carbs as a valid method for meal planning.
Couple questions here on micronutrients, and I can speak to the B12. B12 is really only found in animal products. So if you're on a truly low carb diet, you probably don't have to worry about B12 too much. I do recommend patients who are following a plant-based diet, they really need to supplement B12 because it's only found in animal products. We can talk more about that, but that's a whole nother discussion. Cinnamon and chromium, not a lot of evidence is out there. There is some anecdotal reports in the literature that cinnamon can help. I've heard chromium before, but the problem with a lot of that is no one's going to really do a large enough scale study to determine whether cinnamon or chromium is beneficial because, quite frankly, there's no patent. It's really not a conspiracy by physicians to keep you ill. If your sugar seems to respond to some chromium and some cinnamon, by all means, that's great. But there's no patent on cinnamon and chromium, so there's no money to be made. So, quite frankly, you're just going to see small studies, and a lot of times these hucksters will tell you that your doctor wants you to be ill and you should be taking cinnamon and chromium, and we just can't recommend it because it's not really what we'd call evidence-based or scientifically supported. Not to say that it would be harmful. So you just don't want to put a lot of cinnamon, you don't want to have a lot of cinnamon toast with all the sugar on a big piece of bread. That would be a lot of carbs, right, Carmen?
Right. And I often use the analogy like taking cinnamon or adding cinnamon to, a high carb food. It's kind of like bailing a sinking ship with a thimble. You're going to have a minimal effect. It's not going to be like a medications effect. So it might help a little bit, but the problem with a lot of the supplements is that they aren't, it's a pretty unregulated industry. And many of the times that something is labeled a certain way, it might not even contain what it says it contains. And it might not be at a dose that's consistent. So it's a little bit hard to recommend any supplements because of the limited regulation of these products.
I think we'll try to wrap it up there. We've tied you up for a little bit of time at 7:24. I definitely wanted to get this over well before an hour, and we're going to make it. Thank you so much, Carmen, for your time, Molly and Lindsay for being on the call as well. There are care managers, and if you want to speak with Carmen, usually it's good to talk to your doc or your PA here at North Woodward. We can get you in touch with the doctors who can then get you set up with a registered dietitian. Oh, there's another question. Apple cider vinegar. Again, that's another thing, just like cinnamon and chromium. If you're finding that it's beneficial, I don't think it's really harmful. You don't want to overdose on it because it is a little bit acidic. And there's some data to suggest that alkalinization is actually better for you. But if it does help with your sugar, again, that's the important thing. Carmen, are the slides going to be available? Or?
I believe so. Yeah, I think that was the plan, that they were going to send out the slides and then some carb counting information. Somebody had asked to see slide 11 again. So I was just going to, or I'm sorry, 12. So I was just going to pull that up so you can see that.
And we're going to put this up on our website, nwima.com. The whole presentation will be available, and we hope to be able to do more of these. You'll be able to see it there. We're going to send out some supporting material. And then the other thing that I'm going to send out in the next day or so is a questionnaire. What we'd like to do is find out what worked, what didn't work. Again, like I said, this is our first time trying this, and then find out what other topics you might want to know more about. So that'll all be in there, and then there'll just be another blank feedback slot where you can pretty much tell us anything, but we'd love to hear your feedback. And also in 2 weeks, we are going to try this again. It'll be a presentation that I'll be doing on exercise as medicine. And it's important to know that exercise can have an effect on, obviously, your weight. It can reduce heart disease by 50%. It can help control blood sugars and diabetes, improves depression, stress, mood. It's the only thing that's ever been shown to make a benefit in memory loss, and may actually keep Alzheimer's at bay, or at least hold it off longer. Cancers like colon, breast, uterine, and lung have all been shown to be improved or prevented with exercise. So we're going to have a little bit of information about that, and everybody can exercise. We're going to talk about ways to do it, how long, how frequently, how intense. That's what it's going to be about. And then at the end of that, we're going to also do some exercise. We're going to try to get together and do some group exercises heading into the summer once a week. And we have a challenge for you at the end of that presentation. So that's enough of a teaser there. Any other comments on this slide? Or
Oh, I just wanted to mention that I'm going to be sending an updated version of the handout to Lindsay, because I realized that there was a update to the document. So I'm going to send you a new version. So I don't know if you've already sent that out to all the participants, but there's a new version that I think would be better. So I'll send that along tonight.
all right, thanks again, Carmen. Anything in the lobby? Anybody? Are we all set to wrap up? Okay. Well, thank you for tuning in tonight. We'll be in touch on your email, and we'd love your feedback. Thanks for tuning in, and bye for now. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.
Thanks.